this episode of End of Life Conversations. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, grief and loss, and the end of life.
Every episode, we are so honored and blessed to share stories with amazing, compassionate, and wise guests. So let's get started.
Today, we are excited to spend time with Brie Smith. Brie is the longest standing employee at Return Home, a leader in the new but old practice of Terramation, or body composting. She first served as Director of Services, then as COO, and now she is responsible for overseeing Return Home's community outreach initiatives, including both their in-person and their online efforts. She's also the general manager of Return Home's newest venture, Terrapets. With Terrapets, she works to offer Terramation to families who have lost their beloved pets. Finally, Brie is the voice of Return Home, delivering our message of sustainable death care to both traditional media and social media alike. Brie has been a licensed funeral director and embalmer in Washington State since 2014. After graduating with honors from Mesa Community College Mortuary Science program, she uprooted and made a pointed move to surround herself with the beauty of the Pacific Northwest. Specifically, she wanted to be near her family and the majestic resident orca pods and marine life.
After beginning her work in the funeral industry in 2011 doing death calls, she quickly found a passion for helping people during one of the most challenging times of their lives. With an immediate knack for gentle guidance and a complete lack of judgment, Brie found herself feeling deep compassion for every single decedent and each one of their family members. Because of this sincerity, she has been able to continue providing excellent support to each family that she encounters, whether working with humans or pets. While Brie originally joined in the Return Home team to challenge her professional aptitude, she quickly found herself passionate about the science behind the natural breakdown of the body. Always up for a new adventure, Brie has been given the opportunity to dive deep into the process of composting. She takes joy in learning about the intricacies that make each Terramation successful. Her passion to deliver an industry-leading standard of care, combined with her vigor to learn and adapt to difficult situations, has made her a skilled executive of their team. So glad to have you, Brie. And boy, I resonate with all those things, wanting to be near the orcas. And
It's magical up here. The second that I got the opportunity, I was like, that's where I want to be. It's second to none as far as beauty, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ana Luisa lives in Colorado, which is pretty awesome too.
It's up there. Yeah.
Oh, but living near orca?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
It is.
But welcome, Brie.
Thank you. It's such an honor for me to be here chatting with the two of you. I am grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about something different today.
Mm-hmm. Great to have you.
Yes. And with that, let's get us going on this conversation. Our first question we offer all of our guests is, how does death impact this story of your life and your journey here?
Yeah, I mean, I can go pretty deep on this question alone. I was raised by family who had ranch property. So I was raised in Montana. And in the summers, I would go to brandings, and I learned very young the cycle of life and death. And with that came law enforcement family as well. So I was exposed at a very young age also to kind of a different side of life that not everyone might be exposed to. While my dad was working nights, my mom was a cosmetologist, and in the evenings, she would go do hair and makeup at the local funeral home. And so when I was a very young girl, I would accompany her to do the hair and makeup. She loves this one story where we were sitting there one night and it was a mop or maybe a broom fell, and she freaked out and had her moment of panic. And I was maybe 6 years old, and I just sat on a stool. I just looked over at her. I said, Mom, it's not like she's going to hurt you. And so since I was very young, I've just had a real comprehension of life and death and the cycle at hand. And as it were, as I aged, I found out I had a knack for what is called restorative art, which is when someone has undergone a tragic accident, being able to bring them back to their likeness for their family to say goodbye. And so I got into the funeral industry and the profession because I liked putting people back together again. And that was what I felt really passionate about when I first started. With that comes a journey of now about 13 years in the death care industry. And what I've learned is that I can still put people together without the use of chemicals. And so I still get to utilize my skills, but really what I'm doing now with Return Home is serving the grief journey in a way that I hadn't been able to do previously. If you're not familiar with the service, it's composting. It's a much slower moving service. It's very gentle and passive. And with that comes a different grief journey than maybe having a service after a week or getting your cremated remains back of your loved one after a week. So I've learned a lot through my journey of traditional death care all the way through to now what I'm doing, which might be considered progressive, I guess.
I love it.
So cool.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the current work that you're doing, if you would, your role. And
Yeah. So when I started at Return Home, I was our first director of services. So I was the licensed funeral director and embalmer on staff. I met with the families who came into our care in the very beginning. There was a lot of navigating, what you're used to and what your day to day looks like are completely different because you're not always actively with the person. With disposition, usually the funeral director is kind of present the whole way through. And in this case, I would lay people to rest in their vessel and then I was hands off. So it gave me an opportunity to really focus on what it meant for the families to be able to be involved and really step into our namesake. So now, after we've been open for about 3 years in June, we do home services. We encourage participation by the family. Most funeral homes will not let you in their prep room. We opened up our prep room to the public for families to bathe their loved ones with us. And what we're seeing is a complete, like I said previously, transformation of what the relationship with death looks like, and really giving people back the power and putting the hands that love you in life, giving them the opportunity to continue loving you in death.
beautiful.
That's so lovely.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, what a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for doing that work. Yeah, we really appreciate that. We talk a lot about the process of death and dying and all that's here. And so there's all these places where people don't talk about these things and where they need. We were just talking today about what kind of ways we can be there for them. And so thank you so much for that great work.
Yes, and also thinking about where we assume the invitation is or won't be, right? Like knowing that your funeral home actually encourages and opens their doors for body care at the end is so unlike any other service that I hear about. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to actually be touching and just cleaning that body and saying goodbye. It's a wonderful start to that grief journey.
Well, you mentioned sacred space earlier. And, when I think about death, I come from a couple different stocks, but Armenian specifically is a great deal of my family. And they handle things in a very different way. They're very tangible with their dead. And if you think about it, maybe a couple hundred years ago, even in the US, but all over the world, for millennia, we've handled our own people for the most part. If somebody passes away, you clear the dining room table and you lay them out and you anoint their head and you pray and you have these sacred moments. And it's a complex, what the industry is in the United States, and in some other developed countries, it's become an industry. And funeral professionals are not the only people capable of handling the dead, but we've done a really good job of pretending like we are. I feel much more useful to a family when I give them and facilitate their needs. And then usually I'm kicked out of the room and they're practicing their own new rituals and rites. And that has been so sacred and transformative and beautiful and healing.
Mm.
Yeah, truly healing.
Wow.
And it's also creating memories for them, right? It's a really beautiful memory that has been usurped by that complex that you talk about, that industry of funeral care. So that leads me to my next question, which is what are the biggest challenges that you face in this profession, in this journey?
Less so now. I there was a couple challenges. I think one of my biggest challenges was that I used to think that I was really helping people when I would pick up their loved one on a Sunday, and then maybe I'd meet with them on a Monday, and then by Friday I had their death certificates in the urn to them, and I had done a really good job for that family. But what I realized is that I was doing a really good job for my boss, and that maybe that family hadn't even seen their loved one. Maybe their loved one passed away in the hospital. We didn't give them the opportunity to interact. They didn't want to do a viewing, a proper viewing. They didn't want embalmed. So they thought that maybe it wasn't an option to be with their person. I cremated them and then I returned them, and their loss hadn't even set in. The reality of them not being there, and I'm giving their family their ashes, and that was challenging. I didn't know it while I was in the middle of it, but looking back, I always like to point out how resourceful the funeral director in your life can be, and the person in your town who deals with these things, because we are event planners. We know about, end of life and estates and probate and, social security, and we're just abundantly resourceful. And not being seen as that was challenging. And now we're seen as that because we have at least, 60 to 90 days with this family. So they'll come to us with needs the way I wasn't seeing before. Another challenge I ran into, and this is just personal, but again, you could probably tell a little bit from my spirit by the fact that I came here for the orca, right? I'm really in touch with the water and I love, water mammals, and it's like my second obsession, right? But ultimately, I think that moving to the Pacific Northwest and specifically Pierce and King County really opened me up to the fact that everyone here is cremated. Like 90% of our people are going into the retort. And I was just, cremating all day, and it did not fill the cup. There was something about it that was so quick. And, sometimes people don't know that professionals have to adjust the crematory and open up and move things around sometimes. And these are things that were heavy on my heart. And I was kind of looking at other opportunities in the industry when I came upon Return Home, because I did not like cremating every day. That was really hard on me. And again, I wanted to be able to embalm. I wanted to be able to bring people back to their likeness and make them beautiful. And that just isn't a practice that happens here as frequently. So.
Wow. Fascinating. Yeah, I don't think that we've ever spoken to somebody who did that work specifically. That's really fascinating, interesting to hear. And thank you for sharing that and being so open about it and vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking about the choices that now you have found, right? So not everybody wants to be embalmed, but some people do. Not everybody wants to be cremated, but now we have terramation, which is an option. I know some people who have said, the minute I die, just like, scrub me clean, whatever you're going to do, and cremate me and just be done. Like, there are people who have said that to me. And there are people whose family would say, I want you to be here for as long as I can possibly keep you. So you have just, in a few sentences, given us a lot of different options that people really have, in some places.
That's my whole hope of existing right now, really, especially doing community outreach, is to feel, or to rather give people empowerment, for them to feel really well educated. We've At Return Homes, people send their loved ones to us. We're only in Auburn, Washington right now. We don't have other firms. So we've reached out to, people from 26 plus states, and to be able to empower families all over the United States and educate them and teach them that embalming is usually not required. In fact, only one state requires embalming for out of state transport. And, there's so many nuanced things that there's either, people have a preconceived notion, or they've been told something that's maybe a policy at the funeral home, but it's not actually a state law. So really being able to fine tune and get people comfortable with their laws in their state, that's been amazing. And again, just being a resource.
Wow, that's really huge. Thank you for that. I do a class about end of life planning, and one of the things we talk about is all the different choices that are out there now. But that's something I've got to add to it, is that you can move from one state to another without embalming, because I think a lot of people would assume that's the way it has to be, and that they have a great resource with you all down there. So that's good. Thank you for that.
You bet. Yeah. Actually, on our website, we have a full resource center that's not about return home at all. It's just about death and different resources for different services or information, why we wear black to funerals, just, random things. But that's been a fun place for us to be able to put our passion, because we are really passionate about giving information and letting people feel like they have complete control over what their options are going to be, where they're going to go, who's going to touch them. It's really important to people more now, I find, as younger generations are aging up. A lot of boomers in my life are like, just throw me out in the woods and let me,
Yep.
but a lot of people my age are like, wait, no, like I want to put my mind behind this, and I want, so it's interesting to see the shifts culturally and generationally too.
Yeah, I think both Ana Luisa and I have agreed that they could just roll us off a cliff somewhere and we'd be very happy,
I would love to feed the birds. No lie.
That's one.
Get you to Nepal. Is it Nepal where they?
Yeah, the air
Sky burial.
Sky burials. That's right. Although when I was doing my natural funeral care training, my teacher actually had a family here in Denver whose mom wanted to be left out in the woods as well. And they were just like, Mom, you can't do this. And she found that in Grand Junction, there is those places where you can lay your body out for scientists to see how forensics.
A body farm?
Yes. And so she said that she showed up at the house when this woman passed. They cleaned her up, put her in, a cardboard coffin, and there was a caravan from Denver down to Grand Junction. And they knocked on this place and brought her in. And she said it was so fun to see these guys are like, this has never happened to us, but welcome. And they laid her out to rest to be eaten by, the animals of the place. So I love that. I would do that too.
It's cool because a lot of the species that will find you help pollinate the trees and the flora in the area. So it's actually it's a practice. In fact, on the ranch, well, we would take our, there would be sometimes animals that were not our animals, and we would put them along the trails in the backwoods area because it would help pollinate the trees. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, exactly. And all the remains, they go down into the soil. The mycelium turns it into food, and it gets spread around the whole forest. It's the way it's supposed to work, right? I love that. That's so great. What kind of things do you need to feel supported?
Oh God, that's such a good question. For me, the staff around me, the people who I spend more time with than my family, these individuals. One thing I have to be really grateful to our CEO, Micah, for is he came from kind of a traditional business background. So he's not familiar with the nuance of what it means to be a funeral professional, i.e., we're pretty underpaid. We work really, really rigorous hours. We're kind of untouchable. Like, people don't really talk about us. They don't really think about us. I don't know how many times in your life you've thought about the crematory operator in your life, but it's not an easy job. So he really brought to the forefront what was unfamiliar to me, which was fair wages for the job and this very team-oriented mentality where he's very open to feedback. And for me, in the industry as a whole, to have a leader in front of me instead of kind of behind me, but really letting us have a voice building this service. I mean, this service was built by myself and Katie Houston, who's our services manager now. And, previously maybe our thoughts wouldn't have been as considered. And certainly they may have been considered, but would they have been implemented? And so what fills my cup is having a leadership that's really perceptive and a team that's highly motivated. We're a startup, so I don't know if that means anything to you, but it is ridiculously long hours. And so to be surrounded by people who you want to also spend time with socially has been a blessing. And I think that, and then also, like, for instance, we just did May Day outreach on May 1. We went out and gave Gerber daisies to the, assisted living facilities, hospice facilities. Doing this outreach now is really filling the cup too, because there's no ulterior motive. I just wanted to give you a daisy and see you smile. And being allowed to do that has been really enriching for sure.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about the challenges of shoveling people into the crematory over and over and over again. Do you find that there are practices that you have or things that you do to just settle yourself, to be present yourself? And I mean, now you don't have to do that work. So that's probably the biggest step right there, is you've created a much better work environment. You're working in a much better environment. But I just wonder if there's other practices that have helped you or help support you, carry you through that kind of thought, or through that kind of challenge?
That's such a good question, Wakil. I think that music, it might sound strange, but really over the ear sensory music that's, certain, I forget what they call them, but like frequencies, you can find certain music that's certain frequencies that's really calming. I just listened to music that made me feel calm, and like, maybe even some like watery kind of music, just kind of like trying to put myself in the right place. But when you're in it, you're numb to it. I can only say that. And I didn't really know that it was as bothersome as I now know it is when I was in it. I just turned on my headphones and, did the thing that I did 3 times a day for 8 years straight or whatever. It's just so part of my routine that I think that's one thing I would take away, is slowing down on your off time to see if what you're doing really aligns with what you're able to handle in your spirit and in your heart. For me, it was a bit much.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So important.
Well, and Brie, follow up with that. Do you have other people who are in similar professions who you could just kind of talk to and just have some time to just, in Spanish is desahogarte, like just pull everything out that's on your heart so that you don't get too weighted down?
Yeah, we have resources. So the National Funeral Directors Association, they give you a phone number that you can call, and there's people on the other end. Oh man, as a group, I've got so many friends who are in this profession, and it's this thing of we've all seen so much and we've all hurt so deeply that sometimes it's a little hard to talk about, because you don't want to feel like you're one-upping each other, but when one person brings it up, the next person has another, and it kind of goes like that. But there's really not a support system. Like, maybe the same way first responders might expect resources and people to bring them nice things and do nice things for them. And, that doesn't really happen with frequency in this industry. So we kind of have to build our own. And like, that's kind of what we did here at Return Home. But I'm actually starting a monthly hour where basically I'm going to do like a game, something on Zoom, but where it's more of a community moment for our profession specifically, where people can gather and vent. And it's on an app called Slack, and we are called the Death Darlings. And that's where we all go right now and just put all of our thoughts and angst and, anything that's happening. But it's hard to find a support system for this because it's so wide reaching. And yeah, we don't get categorized with those first responders. So it's a little different.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm going to hold space for that in my own heart because I feel like it is needed. It's needed in so many of these professions where we're occasionally brought into maybe a traumatic moment. And, there's a lot of like HIPAA pieces. There's also like that, what you just mentioned was like, you don't want to up anybody else about this experience that I've just had. But I do think that there needs to be a safe container for folks who are encountering all kinds of unspoken stories so that they can you can stay safe and well resourced.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely space for it in this, mecca that we call the industry that is the funeral complex. There's a lot of corporate entities owning funeral homes, and they have internal resources, which is really nice, but community resources are lacking.
Wow. Wonderful. Thank you. That's definitely something we're going to consider and hold on to.
Yeah. So I need to ask you, what frightens you about the end of life?
Mm. I think mostly just thinking about, the vulnerability of it all, maybe. Like, I'm not really afraid of what happens next or what's to come. I feel really secure with where my spirit lands on whatever timeline we're on right now. I just feel at peace with what's going to happen, whether it's good or bad. What I know is that I fear being manipulated. I fear being, quite frankly, like, this is kind of a little bit, this might not be received well by every single person. I'm afraid to be autopsied. I'm afraid to have a donation take place that would mutilate my body, where my husband might not be able to be with me. He's voiced that he wants to be physically with me, touch me, and kind of like what we do here at Return Home, be tangible. So to have that happen and for him to not get that opportunity would be really hard for me. But I mean, all in all, I don't have a lot of fears. I could go out, bungee jumping or doing something crazy, or I could just die in bed old, and I'd be at peace with pretty much all of it at this point. So
Yeah. Let me back up a little bit though. You, in your state, do you get to choose whether or not you're a donor?
you do, yeah. So you can sign up, but they still call and ask the next of kin regardless. Like, they're still gonna.
They do. I know. So that actually happened when my sister passed, and I was kind of surprised that I thought I preempted that conversation. And I said, there's not going to be any donation at all. And we're doing natural care in this hospital room. And they still came and knocked. And I'm glad that I actually opened the door and said, no, leave. But the fact that that's being asked, I mean, in spite of, yeah, that's a little tricky.
I've had families get straight up traumatized because their loved one dies at 10 o'clock at night, and they get phone calls until 6 a.m., just like multiple. And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes they do a really good job. Sometimes it's seamless. Sometimes it's set up ahead of time, but they will ask, and it can be really a tough conversation. And there can be guilt that comes along with it. And there's a lot that goes behind that. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, it's good to know because I thought I was like the only one that got asked after the fact. I was like, but because we don't talk about this, right? Because nobody is saying, hey, did that happen to you? And we're like, hey, like, put an end to this. This is not okay.
Right. And does it help to have the advanced care director specifically say this isn't going to happen, or do they still call anyway?
I think if it's like they're in front of them in writing, they're probably not going to push the envelope, right? But otherwise, it's kind of open up to interpretation, and they just call because they want to make sure. They want to double check.
Yeah. Well, I understand it's a big need, and I can understand their need and their work to try to find the donors that they need. But still, it's invasive and traumatic, and I think that's an important thing to note, and maybe something for us all to consider as ways we could avoid that, and how we could help others avoid it. Right.
And I think too, knowing which donation program it is, there's a lot of nuance to the programs themselves. So, making sure that if you are going to do that, that you're donating to a program that aligns with you, right? So, like, maybe the University of Washington here in Washington, they do amazing work, especially with like the brain and things like that. So that might be in line with something that you believe, whereas just like maybe a general donation might not be. So you might want to know the difference between what it means to be a full body donor, a cornea only donor. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to donation.
Yeah, actually, this reminds me that I did talk to somebody maybe about 10 years ago, and she was traumatized and frustrated because her mother had wanted her to donate her body to science. And it was like a go, everything was in place. But then the university actually charged her for donating. And so for, the whole, I don't even know all the details of that. And she said, it was like so strange to like lose your mom and still get a bill for donating. And so I like that you just mentioned that you need to know what program you're actually signing up for. So if like an elder of ours, a loved one is saying, hey, I'm already signed up for body donation, like maybe we should get a little more information.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about that in the class as well, and I always recommend you find out everything you can about that from the people who you're donating to, as well as one of the other things that's come up is what happens when they're done with you, right? And really understanding what happens to your remains when they're done, and making sure that's all understood and on paper, because somebody I know just didn't ever hear back. They or they got some ashes that they didn't know for sure were even their parents. So it's really hugely important. And actually, you've answered the following question, which how do we support ourselves, or how do you feel more supported in regard to that fear? And it sounds like it's really just about knowledge and education, and sounds like your group is doing a great job, and thanks for that. It's really good. So we could probably just jump right into the next one.
Education's number one. That's why we're on social media. That's why I just absolutely demolish my schedule by squeezing in videos every week. It's because I know what it means to feel uninformed. And I've seen what it means on my families for them to feel uninformed. So we don't even do just Terramation stuff. We do all sorts of death stuff because people deserve to be educated. And I think it's so great that you're out there doing that, because it's also a need that we have, is people just talking openly about it. But it's a tough conversation.
Yeah, it is.
You did mention like music and your community of fellow what did you call it? The death
Darlings.
Death darlings. I like that. We're the death darlings along with you. How do you have more ways to resource yourself? What I'm asking is, on those really slogging days when it was a tough day at work, a lot of death. I don't want to name it trauma, because not everything will be traumatic. It's just occasionally some things will be a little bit harder. So how do you go home and make sure that you're going to be ready for the next day when you have to go back to work?
That's a really good question. Self-care has never been a strength of mine, but this year, actually, I what you don't know about me is that I had 4 surgeries from like 2022, late 2022 to actually 1 year ago this month. I had 4 surgeries. And so that was a result of me not taking good care of myself. And since what I do is usually when I go home, first and foremost, I've got a phenomenal home life. My husband's incredibly supportive, and he's a teacher. So he works really early in the day. So he takes care of me in the evenings a lot because he's already home, and our dog's there, and he's making dinner. So that's been really, nice to have an actual steady home life. But personally, I sit in the bath and I just listen to music, and I have one of those like sensory, like Aurora Borealis machines. And I just like lay and look at this machine and just try to kind of calm down. But I mean, I don't even know what to say aside from the mental stuff just kind of goes away with time. Like I've definitely had days where there's something that I come into the office and I can't shake. I can still name like 10 names of individuals for the last 13 years that I've helped them, and I can still see them when I close my eyes, and I know how they died, and I remember their next of kin. And so, I mean, sometimes you can't bath it away, but taking a bath, kind of trying to do some yoga, like a little meditation, prayer. I surround myself with love, and I really like gemstones. So I've got this like whole collection of like raw minerals that I get this like earthy vibe from. It just makes me feel really good. And I love to garden, of course. So my garden is usually where I go spend like 95% of my time when I'm feeling angst up. There's nothing quite like just digging in the dirt. It just makes me feel better.
So true. And so, Brie, I am going to mirror back to you that you are doing a good job with self-care. You are in a very stable and grounded relationship at home, and you're seen and met. You take baths and stare into the stars, and that's always exciting for me. You touch the ground and you play with stones, and they are also lighting your way. So you are doing a really good job. You are taking care of yourself, and I see that.
Thank you. Thank you. The best I ever have by far. Maturity helps. Yeah. You know your limitations,
100%. The older we get, the more it's like, oh no, this is actually really happening. I need help.
Yeah, this is really important. Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for saying that. It really means a lot, actually.
Yeah, so true. Well, one last question, and that is there anything you wish we had asked you about? And also, while you're talking about this, you could talk a little more about the work you're doing, the Terra Pets, and anything else that you want to share, but specifically anything that you wish we had asked about.
Yeah, right now I'm just kind of in this new space, but I think anytime you ask anybody about, what it means to die, and death is what their plan is, like what are they going to do with their body? And I would have told you green burial had this been a couple of years ago. I was a green burial proponent. I also was interested in alkaline hydrolysis because your girl's a water sign. I'm looking at, but ultimately my husband and I really resonate with Terramation because it's life-giving, and that same feeling and sensation and serotonin release you get when you dig in the ground is what you get when you get your loved one back and they're composted. There's an energy there that's a transfer of this beautiful life that you've seen live. And so I'm really excited to be terramated. I know that probably sounds kind of weird, but my family knows what I want and they know where I want to go. And now I'm so blessed to have Terra Pets be, we haven't really advertised a lot. I got a call from California today. I don't know how people are finding us, but ultimately to be able to take what I've learned with the human side of this business and what I've developed as far as systems and transfer it over to a place that's happens with so much more frequency, right? So I might meet with a family twice in my tenure for their family, whether it's a spouse or a parent or a child. But there's a good chance I'm going to meet with someone with their animal multiple times over the next couple years, even potentially, because most people have multiple animals and animals don't live as long. And what I've already seen with Terra Pets is families who, like, for instance, one family had to put their dog down that morning. And that afternoon, they're with me in our facility, taking paw prints on clay, taking nose prints. Their hands are on their animal and they're interacting with their animal, and their grief journey is so different. And I think about how I've had to lose my animals, and maybe I'm the weird one, because not everyone thinks like this about their animals, but to me, they're family. And so for me to be able to give people the ability to come and lay their hands on their animal and interact with them after they've passed, they're cold and they don't quite feel the same and they're not breathing, but the family's coming in devastated and leaving almost jovial in a way. They got to get these beautiful things. They took some whiskers. They did things. And so for me, it's just another stamp on the seal of I am doing the right thing by giving people power and by giving them a space to grieve. And I'm, as a professional, return home is probably the single greatest thing I've ever participated in. I'm so proud of our team. I'm so proud of our standard of care, of our website. Like I said, that resource center, we've just done so much to help others navigate this crazy, crazy thing we call death. And so to take that over from people to pets is really natural progression. And I feel so humbled and grateful that people trust me with their animal as much as I felt humbled when they trust me with their human, because I know it's a really, really big deal in their heart. So just to be able to help people navigate their grief in a meaningful, hands-on, really, really mindful way, that will be the reward for me for years to come. I know it.
Wow. Thank you. So
Thank
beautiful.
you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
Hey, and did we have a poem?
Oh, yeah. Did you find a poem? I can't remember.
Oh, I do.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me pull it up here.
Do you want to read it?
I can do that. It's called Song of Myself by Walt Whitman from the book Leaves of Grass. And it goes, I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yap over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any, on the shadowed wilds, it coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in the lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stopped somewhere waiting for you.
Perfect.
Oh, that's so perfect.
I love that poem, and I wish I could recite it from memory because it's just so good.
Oh,
It's
so good.
Perfect.
a little wordy though. I hope I did okay. You might have to read it.
You're fine.
Yeah, it was
It's
perfect. Yeah, and we'll put it in the podcast, in the transcript. So
I'll send it
people can
over to
read
you.
it. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
thank you again. Well, thank you, Brie. It's been great. Again, I love the group and or your organization. When you do send links, be sure to include the next conference they're going to do.
Sure.
If you've got information about that, I think people might be interested in participating in that.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have this unique audience that loves this stuff.
So cool too.
We're so curious.
They call, what is it? Death curious. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. Thanks to my daughter Lucero and Nico Rush, who have cheerfully assisted us as our editors and tech support. Additional resources, transcript of this episode, and links to our social media will be in the podcast notes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please subscribe, tell your friends, follow us on social media, and consider supporting us through Patreon. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand.